Sprites Ahoy! By Stephen Lake. Donald was a prolific and dedicated gamer who played nearly every type of game available, including board games, video games, run and jump games, counting games and more. Gaming was his life, and everything was a game. And, while his mother didn't like the idea of his constant gaming, she couldn't deny that it helped Donald in positive ways, such as reaching the top of his class. One day, as Donald was sitting in front of the television playing one of his video games, his mom, Emma, who was currently in the kitchen fixing dinner, peeked around the corner to check on him. "How's the game going, sweetie?" she asked from the kitchen. "I'm doing great. I've even got the top score already. But I'm having difficulty with one of the questions on this level," said Donald. Emma found this curious. "What's the question?" she asked. Donald replied, "What's a diginomicron?" Emma gave him a funny, puzzled look. "I've never heard of anything like that before," she said. Just then a clown-like creature appeared on the screen and sneered at Donald. "Then let me show you what that is," it cackled. It then leapt out of the television, grabbed Donald, and pulled him inside. The little boy screamed as he vanished into a cloud of static a moment later, and was gone. His mother gasped in horror at this and ran over to the TV. She knelt down in front of it, and began banging frantically on the screen. "Donald," she cried anxiously. Just then a strange tingling sensation began flowing through her fingers and up her arm. This surprised her. A moment later her entire body went numb. Glancing down to see what was happening, she looked on in horror as her hands and arms were quickly dissolving into a cloud of sparkling pixels that were then being drawn into the screen. She let out a distorted, terrified scream as she soon vanished into the TV in the same way that Donald had. When she came to, she found herself in a strange, almost surrealistically dingy gray room. But it wasn't the normal grays she was used to. This was the cartoonish grays of a digital world. Confused at this, she looked down at her hands and body, and stared in disbelief at the pair of cartoon-like arms that appeared before her eyes. Upon seeing this, she didn't know whether to scream, pass out, or both. "Hey, Mom! Mom! Are you all right?" came a voice to her right. She turned in surprise to see a cartoon caricature of her little boy standing next to her. "Mom, are you all right?" asked Donald. Emma only nodded. Donald sighed in relief. "Oh good. For a second there I thought you'd lost it." He then bounced around gleefully, and said, "Isn't this awesome? We're, like, video game characters." "Where are we?" asked Emma. "I think we're inside the game, although I don't know how." Just then, four large, brutish men stormed into the room. Two of them grabbed Donald and dragged him away while the other two tried to apprehend his mother. "Help! Someone help me! Stop! Let go!" she cried as she struggled against the two men. Suddenly a small, sparkling dot of light appeared out of nowhere and cold-clocked first one, and then the second man, knocking them both unconscious. Seeing that they were both safely out of action, the sprite puttered over to Emma. As it did, she threw her arms up in front of her, and cried, "Please, don't hurt me." The little ball of light blinked curiously. "I will not hurt you. I am here to help you," it exclaimed. Emma lowered her arms cautiously. "What are you?" she asked. "I am a sprite." "My name is Dale," said the little ball of light. "A sprite? What's that?" she asked. "I am your designated helper throughout this game. I can answer questions and provide you with any help you may need." Emma looked at the sprite in confusion. "What game?" "You are in a puzzle game put on by the quiz master. In order to win your freedom and return to the real world, you must first overcome a series of riddles, puzzles and obstacles that he will present to you. Come, we must hurry and meet up with your playing partner," said the sprite. It then turned and headed for a nearby door. As it did, the door swung open in front of the little sprite. Emma, still uncertain of what was happening, decided that it would be best to follow Dale since she didn't know where she was, or how to get out, and she certainly didn't want to be in that room when the two men woke up again. So she cautiously walked through the doorway and stepped out into a strange, almost insanely designed hallway, with crooked doors and warped windows. Outside the windows she could see a strange world very much akin to something one would find in a children's book. As she looked through one of the windows, she spotted an oversized rabbit chewing contentedly on nearby stalks of grass. A small sprite, similar to the one she was following, danced happily around its head. A moment later the rabbit stood up in fear, and then bolted away as a large wolf-like creature chased after it. She then noticed a beautiful, green and red-skinned dragon flying in the distance, with gold, diamonds and rubies sparkling like fire all across its body. It soon swooped down over a patch of trees and began to lay waste to everything in its path with a stream of scalding hot flame that issued from its mouth. If Emma hadn't been nervous before, she definitely was now. In fact, she was bordering on insanely terrified and felt like she would go crazy at any moment. "Come, we must hurry and meet up with your partner," said Dale. Emma hesitated initially, but soon turned and followed the little sprite. They then walked a short ways further before reaching the end of the hallway where there stood a set of 3 oddly shaped doors that looked like something out of Alice in Wonderland. "Please choose from one of these doors," said Dale. "Which one do I choose?" she asked. "There is no right one, and there is no wrong one. The one you choose will be the one you will partake of and explore," said Dale. Emma studied the 3 doors with concern. Which one should she take? "There is no right one, and there is no wrong one," she said to herself, repeating Dale's words quietly to herself. That sounded more like a puzzle to her than an emphatic statement. That meant that she needed to decode it in order to properly solve the puzzle. No right one. The door on my right must be one I can't pass through, she thought. She then checked it off in her mind before looking at the other 2 remaining doors. She would have to choose one of them. But which one? That was the frustrating dilemma. She knew she had to choose wisely, as she didn't know what would happen to her if she lost, or chose the wrong answer, and if she lost, what might happen to her son. Even more worrisome, she had no idea how they would ever get back to the real world. That alone was terrifying enough as it was. Just then, part of Dale's words echoed again in her mind. "And there is no wrong one." Emma cocked an eyebrow at this. What could this mean? Just then she remembered something she'd heard when visiting her brother one Christmas. A TSA agent, at the airport security checkpoint, had asked her to hold out her left hand to him. However, she had instead held out her right. He'd then shouted at her, "No, your other left." Suddenly a light went on in her mind. She then stepped forward and cautiously opened the middle door. Dale trumpeted proudly. "You did it. You correctly solved the puzzle," he said. But Emma only nodded. That was quite a difficult one to solve. She only hoped that the others after this wouldn't be so bad. She then stepped through the door and found herself standing outside. When she looked back at the door, she noticed that instead of 3, there was only 1. This intrigued her. Either the other 2 doors hadn't been real, or they led to other locations. She wondered what would have happened if she'd chosen one of the other 2. Could they have led to other places in this game world? Being that this was a video game world, anything was possible. "Mom!" shouted Donald as he ran towards her. Emma spun quickly as she heard her son's voice, and then took him into her arms as he leapt at her. Tears soon began to stream down her face. "Oh, thank God you're all right." "I thought I'd lost you," she said happily. "Nah, I'm fine, Mom. My sprite protected me," said Donald. Emma then put him down, and looked up at the glowing ball of light floating just above him. Apparently her son had somehow gained a sprite of his own. Donald soon pointed at hers. "You have one too," he exclaimed. "I am Dale." "It is a pleasure to meet you," said Emma's sprite. "I am Thomas." "The pleasure is all mine," said Donald's sprite. "So what do you want to do next, Mom?" asked Donald. "I want to go home," moaned Emma. "To the real world?" asked Dale. "Yes, back to my home in the real world," said Emma anxiously. "Then you will need to choose one of 3 paths. as you cannot return to the place that is your home until you complete the challenges of the quiz master. A moment later a map appeared in the air between Emma and Donald. Seeing this, the young boy carefully studied it before looking over at Thomas. "Which one will get my mom and I home?" he asked. "All three paths lead to the world of reality. However, you will need to choose the path that best fits your skills and abilities. So choose wisely," said Thomas. Emma leaned over next to Donald and intently studied the map. On each path was a series of 10 trials, at the end of which was a gateway that led to a cartoonish house. "We shouldn't take this path," said Donald, pointing to one of the paths on the map. "Why not?" she asked. Donald pointed off in the distance at the green and red flying dragon she had seen earlier. "Because it has a dragon on it, so I don't think that's a safe path to go on," he said. Good plan. But what about the other two?" asked Emma. Donald seemed to scratch his chin in confusion. "I'm not sure. I think the center one would be best. But it's full of snakes, and I know you don't like those," he said. "Sweetie, if it gets us home faster, I'll endure anything," said Emma. Donald chuckled. "All right, Mom, if you say so." The map then vanished. A set of blinking arrows appeared on the ground a moment later, identifying the path they should take. "Your desired journey has been selected. Please choose your weapons," said Thomas. "Pea shooter," exclaimed Donald excitedly. A slingshot and a bag of stones appeared in his hands a moment later. Emma frowned. "Try not to hurt yourself with that," she said. "I promise I'll be careful," replied Thomas. Emma then turned to step onto the trail, but was blocked by Dale, who flew in front of her. Emma found this curious. "You still need to choose your weapon," said Dale. Emma paused for a moment and thought about this, and then grinned with an almost devilish slyness that seemed to make Dale nervous. "I'll take a cast iron skillet, please," said Emma. Both sprites looked at her in curiosity as a large metal fry pan appeared in her hands. "Your preferred weapon is a skillet," said Dale in confusion. "Hey, you'd be surprised how much damage you can do with 9 pounds of cast iron," she replied with a sly grin. Very well then. Please proceed to the first trial to begin your quest." Emma and Donald looked down briefly at the arrows on the ground in front of them, and then began walking along the path that they pointed to. Eventually they came to a stone pillar, atop of which sat a small dragon who was about the size of an average house cat. "This is the riddle that I must now ask. Ice is to water as sand is to glass. Answer me this, and I will let you pass," it said with a sing-song tone as it grinned slyly. Emma and Donald both thought about this curiously. "What do you think it means, Mom?" asked Donald. "Well, ice is," said Emma, pausing briefly as an idea struck her. "They're different forms of the same thing." The dragon perked up curiously. "Explain," it said. "Ice is the frozen state of water, just like sand is the raw material used to make glass. You melt sand to get glass, just like you melt ice to get water," she exclaimed. The dragon let out a small, grunting puff of fire and smoke in reply. "You have passed the first test. You may continue," it said in frustration. "Yay, Mom!" "Way to go!" exclaimed Donald. They then walked for several minutes before coming to a tree in the middle of the path. The tree opened its eyes and studied them with interest. "This is the riddle that I must now ask. What howls, but has no voice, flies, but has no wings, pushes ships, yet has no arms, and runs swiftly, yet has no feet?" it said. Donald and Emma looked at each other in confusion. The tree grinned in grim satisfaction upon seeing their expressions. "What is your answer?" it said after a bit. "Just 1 minute, young man." "I'm getting to it," scolded Emma. The tree glared at her. "I am hardly young, madam," it protested. Emma crossed her arms and frowned at the tree. It was at this moment that she noticed the leaves on the tree moving. Suddenly the image of a wind-driven ship appeared in her mind. She then looked down at Donald, who appeared to have also come to the same answer. "Wind," they said in unison. The tree looked at them incredulously. After a bit it quivered, and then stepped aside. You have passed the test. You may continue, it said. Emma and Donald smiled happily at this, and then strutted past the tree. As they continued down the path, the little dragon from the first test hopped up on a branch of the tree from the second test and glared at them. However, the tree did not like this at all. Get down, you foul beast. I don't need you scorching my limbs with your troublesome fire, it protested. The little dragon huffed angrily, and then hopped down. Oh, don't get your leaves in a fluster, you dried-up old twig. You're in this just as much as I am, it growled angrily. The tree grunted in annoyance. If I had my way, I'd see all of you fire-breathers sent to the bottom of the sea where you can't harm my kind, it protested. But the little dragon ignored this. It was instead focused on Emma and Donald. I don't like these new players. They're too smart. And we can't let them complete the course. Master would not approve of that, it said after a bit. And how do you propose we go about stopping them? They've already defeated both of us, and therefore have earned the right to advance, said the tree. The dragon pondered this for a bit, and then grinned slyly. While we can't stop them at the puzzle points if they can defeat our riddles, we can stop them from going any further than they already have, it said. And how do you propose we do that? Asked the tree. The little dragon grinned even wider. The pathways between the puzzles are fair game, it said. The tree studied the dragon curiously, and then looked down at the path. Suddenly, it realized what the little dragon was suggesting. It soon grinned slyly. Ah, I see. Good call, old boy. I see what you are suggesting. Therefore, let us make haste and hinder them in the path, and prevent them from advancing to their next stop, it replied. The tree and the dragon then hurried into the woods that bordered the pathway and moved ahead of the two travelers. They soon emerged beyond puzzle point 3 and watched as the water sprite there lowered its head in defeat and gestured for the travelers to continue. The tree and the dragon soon growled in anger. 3 of the 10 have been defeated. We should not allow them a chance to defeat the 4th, growled the dragon. As Emma and Donald proceeded down the path towards the next puzzle point, the tree and the dragon prepared to move against them. But, just as Emma and Donald passed them along the path, Dale spotted the dragon and the tree lurking in the shadows, and cried out in surprise. Ambush! To your left, he shouted. Emma and Donald immediately turned and were surprised to see the great tree from the second puzzle barreling towards them out of the woods in great rage. Dale and Thomas raced over to it and tried to hold it back as Donald pulled out his slingshot and began shooting at it. But his little rocks had no effect on the great lumbering tree. As she was watching this, Emma suddenly caught movement out of the corner of her eye. She instinctively closed her eyes, shrieked and then swung her skillet wildly. To her complete surprise, she both heard and felt bone meet metal as the air echoed with a sound reminiscent of a broken church bell. She soon opened her eyes again and looked in surprise to see the dragon's face stuck firmly to her skillet. That was something she hadn't expected. She gave the skillet a gentle shake and watched as the dragon slowly peeled away from it, and slumped to the ground at her feet. She then cautiously kicked the dragon, but found it to be completely unconscious. Seeing that it was now out of action, she turned her attention back to the tree as Donald ran her way. Dale and Thomas were losing their battle to hold back the tree, and Donald's stones had proven useless against the large slab of talking wood. What do we do now, Mom? Asked Donald anxiously. I don't know, sweetie, replied Emma. Well, if I had a flamethrower, I'd burn that thing to the ground, said Donald angrily. But we don't have said Emma, her voice trailing off as a thought crossed her mind. She suddenly remembered the dragon laying at her feet. So she laid down her skillet, picked up the dragon, and pointed it at the tree. Hang on, sweetie, it's about to get toasty in here, she said as an evil grin crossed her face. She then racked the dragon like a shotgun, and gave its tail a firm squeeze. The dragon's eyes immediately popped open as it yelped in surprise, and then spewed out a long, blazing hot jet of flame that quickly engulfed the tree. The tree, in turn, let out a surprised yelp, and began racing back towards the previous puzzle point where the water sprite lived. The water sprite, upon seeing this, immediately ran for its life as it didn't want to get entangled with the fire-drenched tree. Seeing that it could get no relief from the water sprite, or the fountain, the tree turned towards the woods by the side of the path and tried to seek help from its brothers. But this only caused a stampeding panic among the other trees, who raced away in every direction to avoid being set aflame. Seeing an opportunity in this, Emma motioned to Donald, and said, "Let's get moving." Donald bent down, picked up his mom's skillet, and then followed her down the pathway as she used the little dragon to clear a path before them. One by one the guardians at each of the subsequent puzzle points either abandoned their post, or waved the travelers through, not wishing to cross blades with the dangerous, dragon-wielding woman. Eventually they passed the last puzzle point and found themselves only steps away from a large, square door that opened up before them to reveal their home. They then tossed aside their weapons, including the now exhausted, and highly embarrassed little dragon, and dove through the doorway as it began to close. A moment later they found themselves exploding through their television set and onto their living room floor. After checking to be sure they were all right, they both looked back at the television and spotted the little dragon staring back at them from within it. He soon reached through the screen, pulled the cartridge out of Donald's game console, and quickly retreated back into the TV with the cartridge in hand, which closed the gateway to the magical game world forever. Emma and Donald looked at each other in confusion for a moment, and then gave each other a great big hug as they squealed with joy. "Oh, I'm so glad you're safe, sweetie," said Emma. "You're an awesome fighter, Mom." "Using that dragon as a flamethrower was pure genius," exclaimed Donald. Emma laughed. "Yeah, that was quite unexpected. But it worked well." Donald then looked at his gaming console, and the now empty slot on top of it. "So, what do we do now that they've taken my game?" he asked. Emma grinned. "I believe we've had enough of video games for a while. I think it's time I taught you how to play the games I used to enjoy as a kid." "Cool. Do they have dragons in them?" Emma laughed. "Only if you want them to." The end.